Hello friends, my name is Haley and welcome back to my channel, and today I am bringing you my October wrap-up. So without further ado, let's just jump in and see what I enjoyed reading in October. So the first book that I read this month was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. And as I told you guys in my haul and TBR, that I chose this book to kind of get an idea of world building. And I don't know if it really helped me with world building myself, other than just kind of encouraging me to be able to embrace the entire scope of this whole other world, which is basically what I was looking for. I'm not trying to copy anything, and this isn't really exactly what I'm looking for with my own story. Anyway, that aside, I was pleasantly surprised by this book. Well, I don't know about if surprise is a good word. I was a little bit nervous going into this because I'm not a huge fan of the Throne of Glass books. I've only read the first two, but they're not my favorite. I don't think the characters really stand out. They're very strong. But I felt very different about this book. I feel like the characters are more fleshed out and they're more interesting. I was really compelled by the stories. So if you don't know, this is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, where this girl kills a wolf and she gets dragged into this fairy realm, which they know exists. As humans, they know that the fairy realm exists. She gets dragged into it as payment for killing this wolf. And then she has to live with this high noble fairy named Tamlin and his kind of court, and she learns about this other world that she had really been lied to about before. So she starts to uncover who these people really are and that they're not as bad as the fairy tales have made them out to be. As a Beauty and the Beast retelling, I think Sarah J. Maas did a wonderful job at making this her own. It didn't really even feel like a Beauty and the Beast story once we got past the initial, tropes of the story. I really love that there's so much more of the world that hasn't been explored, and that's what really has me wanting more out of part 2. I don't know if I would say that it's the strongest love story I've ever read. I think it's interesting, and I do really like that it's kind of more of a new adult book, so there's it's a bit more explicit when it comes to the romance, if you get what I'm saying. But I think it just made it for a different, more interesting approach. Because we've all seen the kind of typical YA that they can't really explore too much of the romance. And this one she's not afraid to, and the publisher wasn't afraid to put it out. I actually liked this book so much, I ended up giving it 5 stars. I'm really excited to read A Court of Mist and Fury and see where the story goes. Especially, I'm very intrigued by the relationships, especially what was set up near the end of the book. If you've already read it, you know what I'm talking about. I've just heard so many different things from different people about the characters, and I'm just so curious to see where this story goes. I'm really, really excited to read A Court of the Mist and Fury, and I hope it lives up to my expectations. Next up, I participated in Read by Zoe's 24-hour Halloween readathon, which you can check out. I'll leave a link up at the top and in the bottom if you want to check out my video of that experience. Unfortunately, my eyes got tired, so I didn't get to read as much as I hoped to, but the main book that I read during the readathon was Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. And I loved this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. My only complaint was that it wasn't as eloquent as I would have liked. A lot of the dialogue is just very robotic. There's not a lot added to it, which is fine. It can be great just to read a simple story as well, and there is still a lot of content to it. So it doesn't line up exactly with my own personal tastes. But other than that, I think this was a wonderful novel. This story is about 2 boys who live in this small town, and a big carnival comes into town, and they start to explore and find out that there's a lot of sinister things going on with this carnival. There's some very wicked villains in this book, and I really think that's where this book stands out, is the main villain, the illustrated man, is so sinister in it's kind of almost a subtle way. Like, just the things he says are just creepy, and I think he's so well written and probably one of my favorite villains that I've ever read in a book. I think this book is fantastic. It's a classic that really should be read at autumn time. Next up, I finished The Body by Stephen King from his collection of novellas called Different Seasons. It's about these 4 boys who go on an adventure to look at a dead body, essentially. They hear that the body hasn't been found yet. They know this kid is missing. So they decide, we're gonna go look at the body and maybe be the heroes who discovered it. So it's really just a coming-of-age story. It's about their journey towards finding the body. The majority of the story is just them traveling along the train tracks. If you didn't know, it's the story that Stand By Me is based on, and that's why I wanted to read it because Stand By Me is one of my all-time favorite movies. If you haven't seen it, you must see it. It's so good. But it's really about friendship and how people come together and eventually how they come apart, because it's told from the perspective of one of the boys, and it's him older as a published author, as Stephen King really likes to write main characters who are authors like him. But so he's retelling the past, and then he catches you up on what's happened to the boys since their story ended. I think it's a really good book. I ended up giving it 4 stars because there's a lot of slurs and bad language that I don't mind bad language, but it didn't feel necessary. I felt like it was too much for me, especially the slurs. I know that this was the time when they used racial slurs, but it didn't feel appropriate for this book. It didn't feel like the slurs made any sort of impact on the main characters, other than just to kind of make the bad guys seem more bad, I guess. But I feel like that's kind of a cheap way out. But I think the overall story of the coming of age and friendship and bonds, just discovering a lot about yourself. The main character, Gordy, discovers more about himself as well. For that, I think it is a really well-written, really good story. Interestingly, though, I don't know if you have to read the book to really get the experience. The movie follows the book very well, and it feels like the things that are missing from the movie that are just in the story aren't really that important. Like, you're not missing that much from it. Next up, I finished Hunting Prince Dracula, and I don't have the dust jacket because I last read it at my boyfriend's and I stupidly left it there. So I will add a little picture of what the cover looks like, and that'll have to do. And Carrie Maniscalco wrote this. I have to say that Carrie Maniscalco has really grown as an author between Stalking Jack the Ripper and Hunting Prince Dracula. In Stalking Jack the Ripper, there were a couple chapters where I felt I didn't need to read that. I can just continue on. That's why I was kind of bored and struggled a bit with the story. And also, I have complained before that it's mentioned far too much that Audrey Rose is a girl and she shouldn't be doing these things because it's looked down upon by society. Well, in this book, Maniscalco did a really good job of showing instead of telling, like, yes, Audrey Rose is a badass, and now I finally believe it because I'm not just told, hey, she's doing a thing that girls can't do. I'm just told, here's what she's doing, and I'm thinking internally, wow, this is stuff that other people wouldn't have done at that time, especially a girl, but most guys wouldn't have even done a lot of things that she did. So the story of this book is that Audrey Rose and Thomas have gone to this forensic school in Romania, where it happens to be the castle that Vlad the Impaler lived in. And a lot of murders end up happening that look very similar to Vlad the Impaler's murders from, I think, a couple of 100 years before. So Audrey Rose and Thomas, of course, and the only way they know how, take it upon themselves to discover who the murderer was. I think Carrie Maniscalco really shines in this story by making you second guess who the killer is. I was able to predict Stalking Jack the Ripper about halfway through that book, but this one you're constantly questioning who is it? Was it this person? I don't know. They seem too obvious. This person, I don't know if they have it in them. I really questioned almost every character I came across in the story, and I think that was brilliant, but also when it is revealed, it makes a lot of sense. And it really threw me through a loop, which I loved. It was a great little twist, but it wasn't like an annoying twist, because sometimes I really hate twist endings. I think this book was so great. I can't wait to see how she develops even more with part 3. 5 stars to this book, without a doubt. And the last book that I finished, I don't have a physical copy to show you because I listened to the audiobook. As you can see right here is the image of it. And that is It by Stephen King. Another Stephen King book. I read 2 because October is the month for Stephen King. I have such mixed feelings about this book, which is why I ended up giving it just 3 stars. I feel like 3 stars has kind of been reserved for the books that I know are good in their own way and they have their merits and I can understand why people like them, but they're just personally not for me. This book, I think, the failure for me was just how much detail was in it. It was actually excruciating at times for me to get through it. I listened to it on an audiobook, which is generally easier when it comes to a lot of the detail. You can just kind of zone out, even though I don't like to do that. But I ended up having to step away from it. I listened to another audiobook for a couple days, and then when I put it back in, it picked back up, and I was a little bit more interested, and there was a little less filler, as I kind of felt a lot of it was. I don't know, I think maybe I'm jaded by the movies, because as I was listening to it, I realized that the movies really captured what needed to be. And I'm talking about both movies, the new one that just came out and the original miniseries starring Tim Curry. I feel like I didn't get much more out of the book than just watching the movies. So it's definitely not a book I would read again, but I can appreciate it for what it did at the time, what it is without another movie existing. I think this book really does show off how well Stephen King can write horror. There are some really horrific parts. There actually is one scene that I think is really well done that's not in the movie. That's very, very, probably the most horrific scene of the whole book. So like I said, not my favorite book ever, but I can definitely appreciate it for what it is. And then the last book that I read this month was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I was incredibly impressed with this book. So I know a lot about Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein. I've seen a lot of movies based on the character. So it was really nice to finally read the original source material. I think the biggest thing that I got out of it was that I found this book shockingly mirroring a lot of things that we're going through today. Like, the biggest moral that I took out of it, that might not even been what Mary Shelley was going for, but for me, it was acceptance. I think the book really reinforces the idea that you should accept everybody, whether they're different from you or not. Whenever I have children, I absolutely plan on making them read this in some form. I'll find like an abridged version because this is very wordy, but I think it's a really important lesson, and it was just reminding me so much of what is going on in society today. And maybe if I wasn't reading it at this time in American history, I might have gotten something else out of it, but that was the main moral I got from it, and I feel like it's a really important book for people to read because of that. And also just, I love that you don't really root for either of the characters, because obviously, if you know the tale of Frankenstein, you know that the main thing is that it's creator versus creation, and they're constantly butting heads, and it's just kind of like this, like, war between them, and neither one is very likable. They're both sympathetic at times, but it's really hard to fully sympathize with either character throughout the whole story, and I loved that. I love that I was changing sides and just feeling so many different things about both of these characters. It really makes you think, and it's exactly what I was hoping to get out of this book. 5 out of 5 stars is so great. So that was all the books that I completed this month. I read 6 books, and I'm really proud of myself for that. That's the most I've ever read in a month in my life, and I think I did a really good job. So that's gonna do it for my October wrap-up. I will see you guys soon.